Some sensations begin as mere whispers, brushing against your consciousness like an unseen breeze. They gradually settle beneath your skin, morphing into a lingering gaze, a tentative touch, a fleeting moment. Eventually, these moments accumulate, making denial an impossibility. It was these very moments that instilled the most profound fear within me. My name is Alara, and I am 48 years old. I have dedicated my life to upholding what is right. I believed my second marriage would usher in an era of tranquility, but Alistair brought me only solitude. His emotional absence became such a familiar fixture in my life that I ceased to register it until I found myself adrift in another's gaze. That gaze belonged to Cale, Alistair's son from his first marriage. He was 28, radiating strength and an undeniable maturity, the kind of man who commanded attention. Initially, Cale maintained a respectful distance, but over time, the invisible barrier between us began to dissolve. Now, he was too close, too warm, and we both instinctively understood the unspoken truth. Yet we feigned ignorance. One evening, as darkness fell and the electricity flickered out, I found myself alone in the vast silence of the house. I ventured into the kitchen, searching for a candle, a persistent unease gnawing at me. I called Alistair, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you expect me to do, Alara?" "I'm out of town," he responded, his tone sharp with impatience, his customary indifference palpable. "I'm alone," I reiterated, a faint tremor in my voice. A brief pause stretched between us, then his reply came, clipped and decisive. "I'll send Cale over." I remained silent, but an inexplicable tremor ran through me. Barely 30 minutes later, Cale stood at my doorstep, a flashlight clutched in his hand, that familiar expression on his face, one that conveyed multitudes without uttering a single word. "My father said you were feeling overwhelmed," he remarked, his voice calm, yet underscored with a hint of playful amusement. I just dislike being alone," I stammered, realizing my fingers were gripping the doorframe a little too tightly. Cale stepped inside. A light rain had begun to fall, and his leather jacket was damp, his broad shoulders gleaming faintly in the dim external light. I closed the door behind him. "The power is still out," I murmured, almost to myself. Cale's eyes met mine, holding my gaze intently. "Is that truly such a drawback?" Something within me shifted then, a silent acknowledgement that the pretense could no longer hold. Cale tilted his head slightly, still framed by the doorway, then raised the flashlight, its beam momentarily blinding me. I squinted, my eyes struggling to adjust, but I could feel his gaze slowly descending. I was dressed in my usual evening attire, a delicate nightgown that barely reached my knees, with nothing underneath. I had been on the verge of retiring for the night when the power failed. I had slipped on a light cardigan, but hadn't bothered to tie it. My feet were bare. Cale's gaze lingered at my ankles for a fleeting moment before slowly ascending. "Regardless," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, "go take a seat on the sofa. I'll inspect the fuse box." A peculiar unease settled over me. I felt a tension I couldn't quite name. Cale lived independently, a mere 15-minute drive away. His own abode, his own routines, his own life. Yet here he was, in this house, with me. I silently made my way to the living room sofa as Cale headed towards the fuse box, flashlight in hand. I took a deep, shaky breath, clasping my hands tightly in my lap, realizing the rigid tension that gripped my entire body. He flipped a switch, a soft click. For a fleeting second, the lights flickered to life, then plunged back into utter darkness. Cale let out a soft sigh. "Probably too much strain on one of the circuits," he muttered, then redirected his flashlight beam towards the kitchen. "Allow me to investigate the cause," he announced, stepping into the shadowy room. I hadn't consciously registered his movement into the kitchen, assuming he had descended to the basement, as the fuse box was adjacent to the basement door. Then, a sudden loud metallic clang echoed through the oppressive dark. I flinched, startled. "Kale?" I called out, rising swiftly and moving towards the pitch-black kitchen. No answer. I took another cautious step forward. Moonlight filtering through. The kitchen window cast faint, shifting shadows, but everything remained veiled in impenetrable darkness. I couldn't discern his form, yet I sensed something, a subtle movement. Just as I prepared to turn, my chest collided with something solid, a body. Kale. The flashlight had slipped from his grasp, its beam now askew, casting an erratic glow. His warm, firm body was pressed against mine, and for a fleeting moment, a jolt of pure sensation coursed through me. Instinctively, I attempted to step back, but Kale stood directly in front of me. "You ventured into the kitchen as well?" he inquired, his voice low, almost a whisper. I wasn't sure where you were," I stammered, my breath catching in my throat. Kale's hand brushed lightly against my waist, perhaps merely for balance, yet my body interpreted it as something far more profound. "If this is your initial exposure to confessions of this nature and you wish to offer your support, I invite you to join my channel and activate notifications. Trust me, you won't want this narrative to conclude in a shadow's dot in the profound darkness. Our eyes were useless. We could only feel." And in that moment, I realized that the undeniable pull we had so diligently pretended didn't exist had now grown too potent to ignore. Our breathing was the sole sound in the heavy silence. Kale's breath was exquisitely close, and there was nothing to prevent our gazes from locking, except, of course, the absolute blackness that enveloped us. I placed my hand on his chest, attempting to create a slight distance, but he remained steadfast, and so did I. "Alara," he whispered, the mere sound of my name spoken in his voice sending an involuntary shiver through me. I needed to regain control. I shook my head faintly, drew in an unsteady breath, and forced my voice to sound normal. "What seems to be the issue?" I managed. Kale slowly withdrew his hand from my waist, yet he remained in close proximity. The flashlight lay abandoned, and the kitchen was almost completely swallowed by darkness, with only a slender ribbon of moonlight trickling through the window, casting soft, elusive shadows. "I believe it's the washing machine," he murmured. "It must have been operating when the power failed and is now attempting to restart." I swallowed hard. "So we need to unplug it, right?" Kale nodded, but a palpable hesitation hung in the air, an unseen yet intensely felt tension. Finally, I perceived the subtle shift of his silhouette as he moved towards the washing machine, his form barely discernible in the faint light. Then another loud clang reverberated through the room. I flinched. "What was that?" I whispered. Kale had crouched down, but he lifted his head slightly, his lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "I think I bumped something over," he said, his voice calm, perhaps too calm. Then he reached for the plug, pulling it free. I exhaled deeply, pressing my back against the counter, striding to steady myself. My heart continued its frantic rhythm. I commanded myself to calm down, but how was I to achieve that? Even in the darkness, nothing had truly changed, for emotions, unlike objects, required no light to be felt. Kale straightened once more, and I felt his eyes upon me. "Why do you appear so tense?" he inquired, his tone gently teasing, yet with an undercurrent of something deeper. "I'm not tense," I retorted instantly, but Kale remained unconvinced. I heard his footsteps in the dark, one step, then another. "I know," he said slowly. "I'm tense as well. Something constricted within me." I was unsure of my next move. Should I retreat? Should I avert my gaze to another part of the room? But I did none of these things, for Kale was directly in front of me and I had allowed him to draw this close. For a moment, I had no inkling of what might unfold. Kale remained motionless, his voice still low, our bodies almost touching. In that precise instant, I realized that restoring the power had become nothing more than a convenient excuse. We required no pretext to prolong this charged moment. But then, unexpectedly, Kale pulled back. "Allow me to attend to the fuse first," he stated, his voice still a little rough around the edges. I simply nodded, unable to articulate a response. Kale exited the kitchen, heading towards the fuse box. Even as I listened to his footsteps recede, the oppressive weight upon me remained. Then, click. A moment of pregnant silence followed by a sudden burst of light that flooded the kitchen and the rest of the house. Asterisk, as my eyes adjusted, a realization dawned upon me. I felt utterly exposed. The darkness had been a protective shroud, enveloping me in its anonymity, but now everything was laid bare. Kale turned back, the soft glow illuminating his face, his leather jacket, still damp from the rain, appearing even darker under the light. "All right," he said with a faint smile. "Problem solved." Then he tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing me, his brows rising just a fraction. "But you still seem tense." I swallowed hard. "I just got startled, that's all." Kale let out a soft chuckle, but his eyes never lost their intense focus. "Or," he said, stepping further into the kitchen, "is there another reason?" That familiar feeling stirred within me again, uncomfortable, yet undeniably intoxicating. "I don't know," I admitted. Was that my voice shaking? Kale took another step, now standing directly in front of me. "Alara, you've undergone a transformation lately," he observed, his voice quieter now, but imbued with an intense focus. My breathing quickened. "What do you mean?" Kale's gaze remained unwavering. "You were once more composed, more resilient, but now you seem adrift, don't you?" Something within me tightened painfully. "Kale, But I couldn't complete my sentence, for he was entirely correct. Alistair had abandoned me for years. Even when physically present, his spirit was absent. Initially I waited, then I surrendered. Later I realized I no longer recognized myself. I had become fragile, lost, invisible. And Kale saw it. He placed his hand on the table, close but not quite touching mine. He wasn't trapping me, but if I were to move just a little, I could reach him. "I care for you," he said, his voice soft yet unwavering. Something deep inside me shivered. "You pretend not to feel anything," he continued, "but you do, don't you? Alistair left you alone. He claimed to love you, but he never demonstrated it, and you grew accustomed to that. But Alara," he reached up, his fingers lightly brushing past my hair, "I see you." Just like that, everything I had held back caught in my throat. My eyes burned, but I resisted the urge to look at him. Yet I couldn't help it, for there was something in his eyes too, a profound loneliness, a deep understanding, and something more. I took a deep breath and pulled back slightly, but Kale remained motionless. I wasn't always like this," I whispered. "But now I no longer even know who I am." Kale shook his head gently. "You are still the same. You merely need to remember." And then, just like that, the tears streamed down my cheeks. I instinctively reached up to wipe them away, but Kale simply tilted his head and watched me. "How long have you felt this way?" he asked, his voice gentle. It was too difficult to answer, so I simply whispered, "A long time." Kale didn't look away, me too, and that was what shattered the last remnants of my resistance. For this moment, it wasn't solely about me. He too was alone. He yearned to be seen, to matter. The silence in the kitchen deepened as my tears continued to fall. Kale didn't judge me. He simply understood. I had been alone for so long that this warmth, this moment enveloping me, felt utterly foreign, yet terrifyingly right. Kale let out a slow breath, lifting his hand from the table and leaning back slightly. "Come on," he said, nodding towards the living room. "You look utterly exhausted. There's no way we're celebrating me fixing the fuse like this." I forced a small smile, but something inside me still trembled. We walked into the living room together. Kale sat at one end of the sofa, and I settled beside him. He had removed his leather jacket. His t-shirt clung to his body, still slightly damp. He ran his fingers through his hair. He looked utterly drained. I was exhausted too, but not merely from this night, from years lost in the emptiness that had consumed me for so long. I didn't even realize when I allowed my head to rest against Kale's shoulder. His body was warm, solid, and for the first time in my life, I felt as though someone was truly holding me. His breathing slowed, and so did mine, and before I knew it, my eyes drifted shut. When I awoke, the room was dimly lit. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of my surroundings. Then I felt it. My head still rested on Kale's shoulder, and, more significantly, his head was leaning gently against mine. My breath hitched. Kale stirred slowly, his eyes fluttering open. He lifted his head just a fraction, just enough for our eyes to meet. For a second, we simply gazed at each other, but that look, it held so much. A warmth spread through me, and my heartbeat quickened. Kale's gaze dropped to my lips, and then he leaned in. My breath hitched. He kissed me. At first slow, hesitant, but then everything we had suppressed crashed into that single moment. My hands moved of their own accord, sliding over his shoulders. Kale's hand found my waist, pulling me closer. This was it, something long buried, something forgotten, rising from the ashes, and this time I yearned for it. I kissed him back, fully, deliberately, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. When Kale finally pulled away, we were both breathless. We looked at each other, his eyes still exploring me, still wanting me, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to flee from it. Kale didn't look away. Instead, he whispered, his voice deep and slow, "I've cared for you for a very long time." My breath was unsteady, but his words unlocked something within me, something that had been sealed away for years. I swallowed, releasing the turmoil within me, and took a step towards him. I maintained eye contact, allowing everything I had been suppressing to pour out. I've never felt anything this profoundly right before. Kale didn't hesitate, not for a second. He simply watched me, and then we both moved simultaneously, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. Our lips crashed together again. This time, there was no hesitation, no restraint, no denial. My hand slid up to his shoulders. His hands found my waist, pulling me in closer. My heart pounded as we kissed, my fingers tracing down his arms, until my hand reached for my straps. My breath caught as my fingers hooked around them, and slowly I slid them down. Kale froze as he watched me, but his eyes, they never left mine. He was seeing me, he was loving me, and that's why, without a second thought, I allowed myself to sink down onto the sofa. Kale inhaled sharply, and in that moment, I knew there was no turning back for him either. Kale placed his knee on the sofa, turning his face towards me as I lay back. I watched him freeing himself from his clothes, and it affected me more profoundly than I could articulate. He understood me, he cared for me. He was young and impossibly handsome. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Just then, I noticed the deliberate movement of his hand, and I cherished it. I felt something grander than anything I had ever known before. This time, I didn't wish to surrender to mere excitement. I longed to surrender to raw emotion. I was not alone. I could feel that truth in every fiber of my being. I opened my eyes. allowing my hands to slide down from Kale's shoulders. I wrapped my arms tightly around my own legs. Kale, breathless and flushed, looked irresistible, and in that precise moment, my body tensed. My nails felt as though they were piercing into my thighs. My legs locked completely, and with a soft cry, I surrendered myself. I was instinctively pleading with Kale to do the same. It didn't take long. He listened. I felt a deep warmth expand within me, and afterward, I whispered a soft thank you. When he lay down beside me, he was completely out of breath. We didn't exchange a single word. I simply listened to his steady heartbeat, waiting for his breathing to normalize, and before I knew it, I had drifted off to sleep right there. I knew Alistair wasn't returning home, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Nothing but this profound sense of relief. This unexpected peace as I slipped into slumber. When I awoke that morning, I had no idea Kale had a surprise awaiting me. I had never woken up this elated before, never felt so utterly consumed by love that I desired to throw myself into a man's arms the instant I opened my eyes. But this time, everything was destined to go even further. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. If you've journeyed this far, I know this narrative has captivated you.